I call to order the Kitty Hawk Town Council Monday, March the 2nd, 2020 at Kitty Hawk Town Hall. It's now 5 p.m. We're a little bit early, but we do that because tomorrow is Election Day. I hope everybody will come out and vote for somebody, and we'll see what happens in November. It should be an interesting year, no? And welcome to all that are here and those that will watch it later. Would you join us for a moment of silence and the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, next is approval of the agenda, and I want to pull item 6E from the consent agenda. We need to discuss some reworking on that, and it has to do with the qualifications for professional services, beach design. With that noted, are there any other comments? All right, I call for a motion to approve the amended agenda.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. All right, we have presentations next, and we have, did he show up? Okay, all right. We have Police Officer William Cruden, and this is a new addition, as I understand it.
That's correct.
Good for us.
This is William Cruden, a.k.a. Will. Graduate of Manio High School. Young man, 20 years old. Glad to have him. He's got his roots. He's living in Manio. His parents both live here. They're both involved in the community. Will just completed basic law enforcement training at the College of Albemarle. We're very excited to have him, and he's highly recommended. He's been a good addition. He's about 4 weeks into his field training at this time, so we're ready to go by summer.
Good.
Good deal.
Welcome aboard. We're glad to have you.
Well,
I went through Manio too, so that's a good place. One of the strange things that I have found odd is of all the towns that we have here, we used to fight, Kitty Hawkers used to fight with Manioers because they had all the seat of government. And to be perfectly honest, we're more like Manio now than any of the other towns. So it's kind of come full circle, hasn't it?
it has.
All right.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Congratulations.
Brent Senator, you saw on the agenda, he's got his 20-year anniversary last week here with the town of Kitty Hawk. Brent and I were longtime partners and patrolmen. Brent's a great dedicated employee of the town. I believe he's been a resident since the early 80s. 83. He's lived in Kitty Hawk Village since 1983. His roots are here. He still lives in the same house that his parents passed away, and he obtained the home from them and lives in their homestead. And he hails from Weirton, West Virginia. And it's kind of ironic. That's where now some of my family, my in-laws are from. And it's kind of interesting. And Brent and I knew Brent before he was even a policeman too, when I was in high school at Manio, and then Brent had just graduated and moved here, correct?
Yeah.
Moved here. He's also a graduate of East Carolina University with a degree in economics, correct? Finance, close, and can figure out what he's doing here, but he can count the numbers if we need him to. But Brent has two young sons. Both of them are very active in tennis, and Brent travels around eastern United States with them. Both of them are very, very talented young men, and his wife is works here locally as a general manager of the Ramada for the Websters there. And Brent's great, always on time, and he just had to deal with his son. So, but what a great employee. I mean, Brent's great. He's got 20. We just discussed this. 24 months left, possibly. A little over 24 months for his retirement.
Okay.
All right, Brent, thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Brent, thank you.
enjoyed working with Kitty Hawk.
All right, it looks like Ms. Hester is up. Artie?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello, hello.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here, always. I am Dorothy Hester. I serve as Public Information Officer for Dare County. I'm here because I'm also serving as co-chair of the Dare County Complete Count Committee. Your representative is Mayor Pro Tem Craig Garris. He's been very active with our committee. We've been meeting since the fall. We have a plan that we're executing to spread the word about the 2020 census and the importance to have everyone complete the information once they receive their invitation. It's hard to believe it's March. In a couple of weeks, our citizens will start receiving their invitations, and that's why we're out saying, hey, you're going to get the invitation, look at it, and respond. So the goal of the census is to count everyone that's here once, only once, and in the right place, and that's as of April 1st. I don't really like showing this slide, but it does show that we're improving. It basically shows the self-response rate for Dare County versus the state of North Carolina. And if you go back 20 years to 2000, our rate was 37%. But we did improve, and we were at 78% 10 years ago in 2010. And the goal statewide is 82%. So Donna Creef, my co-chair, and I are working really hard, and the entire committee, to bring that up. There are a lot of impacts. The census impacts political representation. It's constitutionally mandated for the reapportionment of Congress. And North Carolina is expected to gain a seat with this census. And the results are also used for redistricting at all levels of government. The economic impact is significant. $675 billion is distributed throughout the country based on the numbers. I think they say about 16 million for the state of North Carolina. So it is a significant impact. The data is also used for forecasting future needs. That includes transportation and also for implementing programs and services like education and healthcare. Transportation, we all talk about the bridges and how important they are, but this data affects so many of the services in our community, including social services and emergency response. This is the first year. I mentioned I'm going to show you what the invitation is going to look like, and I mentioned that that's going to be coming out in a couple of weeks. This is the first time that folks can apply, or not apply, respond online. In the past, it's just been, they've really stressed that fill in the dots and mail it back in. And you could call and respond, but they're really stressing for folks to use that online method using your computer or smartphone. We have a lot, they're going to be mailed. The invitations will be mailed. This is what the invitation looks like, and they will be mailed, but P.O. box holders do not, they're not mailed to P.O. boxes. We know that we have a lot of people using P.O. boxes here. Those will be hand delivered to the addresses. The census has been doing a lot of work to determine where our year-round residents are, those households that are year-round. And that's a job for them. I know that they've called our GIS department a number of times because they don't really understand why we have so many dwellings and the population is lower than what they would expect with the number of dwellings. And we all know why that is, but those folks that are in other states and DC, we've kind of had to familiarize them with that. But this is the invitation. There is an ID number on that invitation, and that's what the person would use to identify their address when they're completing the census. It should only take less than 15 minutes. There's 9 questions, and then you have to fill out a few questions about each additional person that's in the home. The privacy and confidentiality is being stressed a lot, I know, with all the concerns with identity theft and, you know, people not wanting others to have their information. Some important notes, they will never ask for a full social security number, never ask for money or a donation, never send requests tied to a political party, and they're never going to ask for PIN codes or passcodes or credit card numbers, any of that information. The thing that I want to emphasize is that it really does take all of us to encourage others to participate. We have a lot of outreach. We'll be in the St. Patrick's Day Parade in a couple of weeks. I've brought posters tonight that Melody and the staff are going to help distribute throughout the town and some of the businesses that get a lot of traffic. And we're going to do everything we can to help spread the word, but we would ask you all to do the same and maybe make a pledge to complete the census and let people know you're doing that, and maybe share that on social media for those who are doing that. And also, as your town newsletters come up, just be sure and ask people. What ends up happening, I think our census representative told me they're going to mail or deliver up to 5 times. And if a person doesn't respond, then they start knocking on doors. And if they don't get an answer at the door, then at that point they'll start visiting neighbors trying to find out, you know, who's in a particular residence. So there's going to be a lot of work, and it's going to go into the fall. And I think the final count is due at the end of the year to the president. So, can I answer any questions?
No, I think, not from me anyway. I think we know it's important,
Yes.
and there's job opportunities for extra hours, and people can do it kind of in a flex method.
Thank you for bringing that up, because it pays $17 an hour in Dare County plus travel.
Yeah, try getting that at one of these places around here. So that's pretty good, and you can flex your time too.
Yes.
You can
And
do
they
it
still
in the
do
evening.
need some folks. They
Yeah.
had a bus and
So, yeah, it's important, and I know that the P.O. box thing is a bugaboo because people use that, so I guess people don't steal out of the mailbox, and a whole bunch of reasons.
they've assured me they're prepared for that, so
Okay.
that they can get delivered. So.
And of course, we have a lot of houses that are out-of-towners, so that's another issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I appreciate you bringing it. This will go out just like the other towns, and hopefully people will respond.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dorothy.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
All right, next we have public comment. Does anyone want to speak at public comment? We have 2, one in the beginning, one at the end. All right, let the record show no one came forward. All right, next we have the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion to approve the consent agenda, recognizing we did pull one item?
Motion to approve, Mr. Mayor.
All right.
Removing item 6E for discussion.
All right, do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, hearing none. All right, I pulled item 6E, folks, because 6E is a request for quals for professional services and coastal engineering and design services. That's not a company, that's a issue. That's something to be done. And when I got what we have in front of us from the manager, I realized that the towns of Duck, Southern Shores, Kitty Hawk, and Kill Devil Hills are trying to do this so we can be online to get FEMA reimbursement from a proper designated and contracted professional service. The problem I had with what is in front of us is Duck is in lead. It's kind of generic. It doesn't reflect the particulars of the town of Kitty Hawk. In particular, it doesn't reflect the fact that the town of Kitty Hawk has a different approach for why we wanted to get beach nourishment. It had 3 different missions, and none of those are stated here, basically. That is looking at tax inventory and things of that nature, our tourist bureau, our tourist industry and things of that nature. Well, Kitty Hawk had a different take on that. Kitty Hawk was we needed to protect our infrastructure, and we needed to protect allow our first responders, police, fire, those sort of things was another part of our mission, to be able to get places when they needed to go, and beach nourishment would help us do that. And then the last thing was basically our tax base. So I asked Andy to go back and give us something different and be a little more specific to the town of Kitty Hawk, to include what we do, because whichever firm we deal with, that firm will be basing on what they see in front of them. And if we don't put in the reason that Kitty Hawk did it, then we kind of lose. And that doesn't seem right to me. And if you agree with that, then our instructions tonight, it can be a motion or just a consensus, is to have Andy go back, get with the other towns, and redraft this for something that we can live with, and bring it back to us next month. And I'm told we have time to do that. So, with that in mind, I'll make a motion to direct Andy to go back and redraft this more specific, put some information in it that we can live with, and bring it back to us in March.
Second.
I agreed.
All right, any further comment? All right, hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. All right, Andy, you got your orders. Okay. The next thing is public hearing, and this has to do with the flood damage prevention ordinance. And so basically, we're doing a public hearing, so I'll call for a motion to go into public hearing.
Motion to go into public hearing, Mr. Mayor.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor? Opposed? There are none. I will remind one thing. Lynn, this does not require swearing in, right?
Correct.
Okay. And, but I will, and we have a new member, so just in case you didn't get the memo, the legislature some time back passed the word that we go into public hearing, we listen to all the people that want to speak, we ask questions during that public hearing. Once we go back into our session, regular session, then we discuss it among ourselves and do whatever we're going to do, but we're not open to asking further questions of the audience, so to speak. Okay? They passed the law. We have to follow it. All right, Rob?
All right, as you mentioned, this is dealing with the text amendment to replace our Chapter 14 flood damage prevention ordinance with the new updated version of it, along with the adoption of the flood insurance study and the new flood insurance rate maps. You've had the draft ordinance with you for, I guess, about 2 months now, so I thought tonight I'd kind of just go over a little more in detail on the more substantive changes that are going to affect kind of how we do our day-to-day things. There's a lot of small changes throughout the ordinance that aren't really going to impact a whole lot, and there's a lot of changes from the state model that are required changes that we don't really have any say whether or not we implement it or not. That being said, once I get through the bigger changes, if there are any questions on the smaller stuff throughout the ordinance, I'll be happy to go through them. So just a little review. So the current flood insurance rate maps have 500 structures in a VE zone and about 1,900 structures in an AE flood zone. The base flood elevation in the AE zones west of 158 is currently at 8.3. The AE zones between the highways are between, the base flood is between 9 and 10 feet, depending on where you are. And the VE zones have a base flood elevation ranging from 12 to 14 feet. And I'll note that base flood elevation is 12 to 14 feet above, basically above sea level, not 12 to 14 feet above grade. So you can see on the map there the kind of teal color, that's the VE zone over on the ocean side. Blue is the AE zones, and the yellow is the X zone where there's no minimum flood requirements. So this is a zoomed out version of the new maps, the preliminary maps. In this, there are 278 structures in VE zones, 979 structures in the AE zone, 389 in the AH, and 94 structures in an AO zone. The AH and AO zones we don't currently have. We've had them on previous versions of the maps, and now they're bringing them back. And they're kind of just areas of shallow flooding that you see kind of behind the dunes. So the AE zone, which is in the village on the west side of town, is the one that kind of gave all of us a little bit of heartburn. They're reducing the base flood elevation from 8.3 to 4 feet. The AH zones and the AO zones over between the highways, you can see that light blue color. They're really not changing too much from what we currently have. They're changing from AE to AH, but the base flood is staying at 9 and 10. And then that AO zone, I'll get into the specifics on that later. They don't use a base flood elevation, but a flooding depth above grade. The map showed at 2 feet, which comes to about where the current base flood elevation is in those zones. And then the VE zones base flood is ranging from 11 to 13 feet, and it's actually getting higher in some places along the ocean front. So this is just a side-by-side view of the current maps on the left and the preliminary maps on the right side showing the changes there. You can see there's a good amount of land that's currently in an AE zone over on the village and the west side of town that's actually moving to an X zone too. So given our concern with that, myself and the other town planners in Dare County, we've been working for a couple of years looking at the maps and trying to get ordinances straight and everything. We've come up with what we're calling the local elevation standard. This is going to allow us to kind of put a higher standard on those AE zones, and we're also proposing to regulate some of the X zone properties and shaded X, which currently isn't done anywhere that I'm aware of off the top of my head. But with those properties that we've seen flood even within the past, I guess, 5 years since I've been here, getting moved into an X zone, we thought it would be kind of irresponsible to say they don't have any minimum flood requirements in those areas. And I'll get into the freeboard requirements. Freeboard is where your base flood elevation up to where your top of your bottom floor. The way our ordinance currently regulates it, the way we're proposing it is to be the bottom of the bottom floor. This graph chart is put out by FEMA and just shows how much you benefit for your insurance premiums for every foot above base flood elevation you elevate your house. You can see it's a more drastic impact if you're in the VE zone for every foot higher you get. And they also like to point out that according to FEMA, that incorporating the freeboard adds an upfront cost of construction, approximately 0.25 to 1.5% of total construction. So then you can factor that into your savings over time on your flood insurance premium. So just the ordinance itself, the state puts out a model ordinance at the time of update, and it's just gives you the bare minimum requirements, what you have to do. Also includes some optional language you can put in to be higher standards, and in some cases get more points for the CRS, the community rating system. The versions that you all have gotten in your packets includes the optional language that the staff is recommending to put in. A previous version that I distributed had all of the options, so if there's something that you saw that I didn't include that you think you might want to put in, bring that up. So I mentioned the reference level. Right now, we use the top of the bottom floor as the reference level. Anything, your reference level has to be above or at or above the base flood elevation plus your freeboard requirement. The way we're proposing it for this ordinance is that for structures within the AE, AO, AH, shaded X and X zones, the reference level is being proposed as the bottom of the lowest floor or the bottom of the lowest attendant utility, whichever is lower. This will be the bottom of your floor joists. So anything below that, by law, can only be used for parking, storage, or dry access. Has to be constructed of flood damage resistant materials. And then for structures within the VE zone, the reference level is the bottom of the lowest horizontal structural member. And that's the mandated, that's not one of the optional portions to put in. As I mentioned, we currently use the top of the lowest floor. Using the bottom of the lowest floor essentially raises the top of the floor by 1 foot. This mandates that the floor joists and subfloor and ductwork would be above the regulatory flood protection elevation as well. And using the bottom of the lowest floor as a reference level also gives an additional foot of freeboard when they're calculating our CRS points in September when we have our next review. So the regulatory flood protection elevation, as mentioned, that's the point where your reference level has to be at. In the VE and AH zones, the RFPE is being proposed as the base flood elevation plus 1 foot of freeboard. That's the same as what we currently have, both in the VE and AE zones. To try to counteract the base flood elevation being reduced in the AE zones, we're proposing that the base flood elevation be either 3 foot of freeboard, or the RFPE being base flood elevation plus 3 foot of freeboard, or to an elevation of 8 feet, whichever is higher. In the AO zones, the RFPE is the depth on the flood insurance rate maps plus 1 foot of freeboard. And then in the shaded X and X zones, we're proposing the RFPE to be 8 feet or the natural grade elevation if the natural grade is higher than 8. And I sent out a week or two ago kind of a little visual representation for each one. I thought I'd include it in here just for everyone's benefit. So for the PE, the RFPE I mentioned is base flood elevation plus 1 foot of freeboard. So if you're in a VE zone with a base flood elevation of 12 foot and your ground elevation is 10, then you can see the base flood elevation plus the 1 foot of freeboard, you're going to have to be a minimum of 3 feet off the ground to meet that RFPE. You can see on the right, if your ground elevation is lower, then you're higher off the ground. The RFPE doesn't change based on your ground elevation. Same for the AH zone, it's just the base flood elevation plus 1 foot of freeboard. I've just provided a couple of examples there. The AO zone is the one where it's done a little bit differently. As I mentioned, the base flood elevation is not used. Instead, they use the depth of shallow flooding from grade. All of our Kitty Hawk's AO zones have a depth of 2 feet shown on the flood insurance rate map, and we're proposing 1 foot of freeboard. So that's essentially saying if you're in an AO zone, no matter what your ground elevation is, your highest adjacent grade, your reference level is going to have to be 3 feet above grade. So if your ground elevation is at 12, then your RFPE is going to be at 15. If your ground elevation is at 11, your RFPE is going to be at 14, and so on. The AE zone, proposing base flood elevation plus 3 foot of freeboard or 8 feet, whichever is higher. Basically in Kitty Hawk, we've got, in our AE zones, we've got 2 different base flood elevations. 4, and there's a very small area at the end of, I believe it's Herbert Perry, that's got a base flood elevation of 5. So the way that would work out too is wherever you're at in an AE zone, your reference level or your RFPE is going to be 8 feet. And then the shaded X and X, RFPE is 8 feet, or the natural grade if the natural grade is higher than 8 feet. So that second part is essentially saying if your ground elevation is at 11 feet, we're not going to say you can go excavate 3 feet out to get an additional 3 feet to your roof line. You're going to have to use that 11 foot as your RFPE. So then some of the other changes to the ordinance that would kind of change the way we operate daily. We've added in a requirement that we're proposing to add in a requirement that would require a post-construction V-zone certificate. Currently, it's required for any work done in the V-zone that an engineer has to stamp and certify the V-zone certification saying that construction will be done to meet the V-zone requirements, and they submit that before the permit's issued. And that's it for that part of it. if we adopt this, it would require them to do a post-construction visa and certificate that goes back and just states that everything that was shown on the plans was constructed in the manner and it does meet the visa requirements. The non-conversion agreements, we've discussed this a little bit. It's something that we don't currently do. There's, I think Kill Hills currently does and Dare County does. It's a document that states that the owner will not convert or alter what has been constructed and approved if it's a below base flood elevation enclosure. As I mentioned, they're only permitted to be parking, storage, or dry access, so this kind of helps to prevent, somebody gets a ground floor enclosure, garage, and then the next owner of the house decides that they're going to convert that to living space and they're not aware of the flood requirements or anything. This document would be filed with the Register of Deeds and it would go along with the property, so presumably the next purchaser would see this and realize that they can't have that, they can't convert it to living space. There is language in there that the owner can be released of the restrictive covenant if the enclosure is removed. And I mentioned last month that there's kind of 3 levels on the CRS side of this. You get 30 CRS points for requiring the non-conversion agreement, an additional 30 points for saying that the town has the right to inspect any enclosures to make sure that they haven't been converted, and then another 30 points if you include language that says that the town will inspect it at least once a year. I'm not recommending that we include language that requires that we inspect once a year, but if you look under the duties of the floodplain administrator earlier in the ordinance, it already states that we have the right to inspect upon providing proper credentials. So I think it would be safe to get the second 30 points by just restating the fact that we have the right to inspect. And I've included on your desk, your seats tonight, there's a template agreement. We can either, it was brought up last week that, we don't want to have either myself or anybody else in the future just start getting in the habit of showing up at people's doors saying that we're going to inspect their ground level enclosures. So we can either include language in the ordinance, and I've provided a revised memo there, or put it in the agreement that the floodplain administrator will provide 48 hours notice prior to any inspection, or if you want to change that time frame, that's up to you. Then section 14-19 sets the elevation regulations and restrictions for additions to existing structures within an X or a shaded X zone. This language essentially says that the language for substantial improvement and substantial damage is not going to apply to X zone properties. Substantial improvement is if you're doing a remodel, or substantial damage if your house gets damaged to an extent of 50% of the market value, then you have to bring it into compliance with the current flood ordinance. So the X zone properties would be exempt from those requirements under this language. And then section H8 on page 32 allows for exemptions from flood venting and elevation certificate requirements for small or low-cost accessory structures. These are basically just your storage sheds. And then there's a few sections that are not in the draft that was passed out this month, but I think it was in the original one. Standards for floodplains without established base flood elevations, riverine floodplains, floodways and non-encroachment areas. We don't have any of those flood zones in Kitty Hawk, so I just struck them all from the ordinance. There's, to me, no sense in having a bunch of language that doesn't apply to us. I will mention I did get an email from Mr. Overton in the audience tonight, just address what his 2 concerns. One of it, I just mentioned in the shaded X and X zones. The language that's included in there, it implies that it exempts those properties from the substantial damage and substantial improvement requirements. Mr. Overton was asking if we could add a line that just clearly states that, that the, let's see, substantial improvement, substantial damage definitions as established in Article 2 definitions do not apply to shaded X and X zones. It really wouldn't change the impact of the ordinance. It would just make it, I guess, more clear for anybody that doesn't deal with the ordinance every day that it wouldn't apply. So if that's desired to be added in, that would be fine. And then the second one that he had a question about, I'll go over and I will ask that he explain the definition a little clearer. On page 28 of the ordinance, section 14-19, D4B, it deals with flood vents and flood openings. It states that the total net area of all flood openings must be at least 1 inch for each square foot of enclosed area subject to flooding. And he asked about adding on language that states, or a minimum of 1 engineered square inch for each square foot of enclosed area for an engineered opening. Once I get finished, I'll ask him to explain the engineered square inch, because that was the part that I left that out. I can never get clear on what exactly the engineered square inch was. He's clarified it for me a little bit tonight, and it makes more sense to me, but I'm not going to try to explain it after just learning it myself. So really, and then the second part of the memo that was handed out on the receipts tonight was another question that was brought up throughout the ordinance. You see references to attendant utilities, and those have to meet the regulatory flood protection elevation, but there's no definition included in the ordinance as to what attendant utilities are. So I provided just a real basic draft definition. That attendant utility means any utility that accompany a residential or non-residential structure, including but not limited to ductwork, electrical, mechanical, plumbing, and heating and cooling. So if you want to include that, just to make it clear what exactly we're talking about when we put attendant utilities on the permits, that way there's no question. I think that's all I had, unless there's any questions of me. And Mr. Overton can explain the engineering.
Okay, before we do that, I would also ask before the meeting, were we going to adopt this for enforcement tonight?
Yes. Sorry, I skipped my last slide. So with the ordinance adoption, council, you can adopt the new ordinance and study prior to the June 19th, 2020 effective date on the maps. If that's the case, the ordinance becomes effective upon adoption. Staff can begin permitting to the new maps, the new reference levels established in the ordinance. But for insurance purposes, nothing's going to change until that June 19th, 2020 date. So if you're in an existing constructed home, after tonight, you can't go change your insurance policy based on the new maps. You have to wait until June 19th, or if you've got a house under construction and you get your CO between now and June 19th, your premiums are going to be reflected to the 2006 maps up until that June 19th date.
Rob, I think it's important for the public to know if we were to adopt this tonight, we can always address this again in the future, correct?
Yes, if there's anything in there that 6 months down the line, we see things just not working for us for whatever reason, we're required to update this ordinance with the new maps once the state puts out the model ordinance, but there's nothing preventing us from going in and revising it at any time we need. Really, we just have to, whatever revisions we wanted to do, we'd have to send to the state just to make sure it meets their minimum requirements before we adopt anything.
Okay, thank you.
And I will add to what you just said, in the 2006 ordinance, we did have to go back and readjust some wording. We have so much more information, it's so much better presentation than we had in 06. As a council, we have a good understanding of what's before us. So That's the difference between '06 and today. And we did then. It wasn't a big deal, other than we had to correct it. That was it. All right, anybody have any more questions before I call for speakers?
I do have a question for Rob, or a request for information.
Okay.
Just for people who are listening to this later, the CRS credits, that gets us a better community rating on our flood insurance. How does the points relate to the rate?
So the CRS community rating system, it's a voluntary program that goes along. It kind of encourages implementing higher standards than the minimum NFIP requirements. Right now, Kitty Hawk is a CRS Class 6 community, which means every resident that has a flood insurance policy gets a 15% discount on their premiums. Every 5 years, and our review is coming up in September of this year, the CRS, the ISO folks come to review our program, and they tabulate all the points we get from our ordinance, and the bulk of our points aren't from the ordinance. It's just different daily activities we do, record keeping. There's a lot that goes into it, but every 500 points you get, you can you move up a class for every additional 500 points. So even if the 30 points might not be enough to push us into a better class, but it'll help us stay where we're at, hopefully.
And while we're on the information end of it, let me add that we actually qualify for a 20% discount and have for a long time, but because the state building code is not up to an IMO type code, international code, that got reduced 5%. But that has nothing to do with the work that they do and what we're committing to here. And if the state ever gets the building code up to whatever that criteria is, then hopefully we'll get that 5% back. But it also, we all get brochures once a year and things like that. That's all part of the CRS, and that's part of what they document. But in this particular case, not only the optional things get us the CRS points for the discount, but when they lowered in some of our areas 4 feet, and we add freeboard, then we're kind of getting a better deal in that we will increase the freeboard more, and that gives us CRS points each foot we go up. So it's kind of a backdoor way to.
And I'll add on to that, having the additional freeboard will help on the CRS, but also for the individual property owners. If your floor, your first floor is 4 feet above freeboard, like I showed on that one graph, your premiums are going to be looking a lot better than if we permit it at 1 foot, at elevation of 5 feet back there. So it should be helping them out as well.
Every member of this council has seen 7 foot in Kitty Hawk Landing and so forth. Not once, but more than once. So we know 4 feet is bogus, and the map is wrong. But in a way, it's turning turtle onto it and going to benefit people if we adopt as proposed. All right. Any more questions before I call for speakers? All right. Anyone wishing to speak, please come forward. Let the clerk know, if you haven't already signed up, who you are.
Good evening. My name is Jay Overton. I'm with Albemarle and Associates. Tonight I'm here representing the Outer Banks Home Builders Association. We've got probably half a dozen of our members here tonight, and we'd like to thank Rob and staff and the other planners for the amount of work that they've put into this over the past couple of years. It's something we're going to be dealing with for the next 10 or so years, and I think we all feel much more comfortable with what's going on now than what we did 2 years ago, 3 years ago when we first got the maps. And I think we'll find that it's something that's really good for our citizens. The 2 items that I had sent to Rob a little bit earlier, town attorney would be familiar with the substantial improvement. That language is the same language that's in some of the other ones, and it just kind of restates so that when all of us are no longer involved 5 or 6, 10 years from now, it'll be real clear what we meant. The second item had to do with engineered openings. Right now, on the elevation certificate, it requires you to have 1 square inch of vent for every square foot of floor area that's subject to flooding. And that's a very, very conservative approach. It's something that's in the elevation certificate, in the regulations, and it covers everything. But on the elevation certificate, it also allows for an engineered opening. And what that has to do with, there's a technical bulletin that FEMA puts out where it gives you the opportunity to evaluate the site-specific building. And what the whole purpose between the 1 inch per 1 square foot is looking at your hydrostatic pressure, what you've got on your wall and how your wall is going to react, and keeping it from collapsing and you losing your structure. So when you go through this calculation, it gives you some alternatives. Most of the time you end up that it's found that you have less required vents. Now, vents are cheap. Most of the time, everybody just puts in the 1 inch per square foot and they move ahead. But there are occasions in which it is beneficial to the property owner to be able to use the engineered opening. And it's something that's on the elevation certificate. It's something that's standard practice. It just was not in the ordinance, and that same language has been added into the other ordinances within the county, so that it doesn't leave something out. So someone's wondering why we didn't have that in there. So it's not asking for really something different than what we're already doing. It's just codifying it or putting it in there. So two other things that I wanted to bring to your attention. We can't seem to get but so much going on at one time and get our arms around it. But one of the two things that I think we've got to have further consideration on is building height, because now that we've changed where we're measuring our base flood and how we're moving that reference level up, I'm not quite sure how that's going to affect where we're measuring our building heights. And I apologize to Rob for not bringing this up early. I was just reminded of it a few minutes ago. That's something that we need to kind of keep in consideration, because once we adopt this, then it may affect that same level that we're measuring our building height from. And I don't recall exactly how we're doing it in Kitty Hawk, so you have to forgive me on that.
The last I knew, we were looking at the elevation of the topography and doing four corners and some sort of an average.
Right, so right now we allow 35 feet from the average original grade. So when the site plan comes in, the surveyor will give us the elevation, the existing elevation shots of the four corners of the house, and we'll take the average of that, and we got 35 feet to the peak of the roof from there. But changing the reference level from top of the bottom floor to the bottom of the bottom floor could shave a foot off of the actual, building height itself.
Sure.
That's something that if we need to, we can look at in the zoning ordinance. That's where that's dictated.
Right. It was just something that just came up as we changed one thing. It's so hard to keep up with all the other things that may fall in behind it. And we are changing it by a foot from here, top of the floor joist to the bottom. So that at least is going to probably have a 1 foot effect on many of these structures that fall under this new ordinance. And then the last thing, I know that we just talked about as far as adopting this tonight and move forward, and you can always change it and go back and so forth. Most people have been assuming that the June 19th date would be the date that we would see the new flood prevention ordinances adopted within the various towns and the county, because that's the date of the maps. And I applaud Kitty Hawk for you first in announcing flight, so you're out there first to get the flood prevention ordinance ahead of everybody else. But in keeping with that, if y'all decide to move forward with this tonight, if there was an adoption that was maybe as of April 1st or something, where it gives people who changing the ordinance, we can always modify things, but we can't go back. And there may be some individuals out there that were planning to do something and do that between now and June the 19th, and may not be aware that we were really contemplating doing it tonight. So if we were to give 30 days, then it gives them the opportunity to react, and y'all have given them notice. So I don't have anything that it affects. That's just something I've thought of because y'all are being so diligent in getting this done so quickly. I'm not accustomed to local government acting quicker than what we need to have done. So I applaud you once again for that. And if y'all have any questions for me, I'd be glad to try to answer them.
Same thing would happen in June too.
Okay, anybody? David? You're a builder, man.
I mean, so they say. I've always found the average four-corner elevations to be difficult and challenging. So, yeah, if we're going to even lose a further, it definitely needs to be looked at in detail.
All right.
There's no question about it.
All right, now let me, before I ask for any other speakers, there's something you need to understand. Our bathhouse was built in '04, okay? They changed the rule in '06. We need desperately to fix the bathhouse. It's rotted out. It's got to be repaired.
Yes, sir.
Interestingly enough, when they changed the rule in '06, they required the bathhouse to be 2 feet higher than it is currently.
Right.
All right. So if we adopt this rule, we can flood-proof what we have without changing the footprint.
Yes, sir.
If we tried to raise it 2 feet, we can't fit it because of the parking and
Ramps
all
and all
the
that.
things that go with it. So in order for our visitors to have a place to use and our Ocean Rescue to have a place to headquarter out of, we need this new ordinance.
No, I understand.
Okay? So we're moving ahead because, A, we think we have a good product in front of us that we have to adopt anyway. We know that if we've got problems like you just brought up, we can come back and do something about it. But in the interim, we have a pressing problem. And I don't know how council's going to vote tonight, but I suspect we'll move ahead because we need to do that. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes sense. I know that in the planning and so forth, there are certain things that have got to be done, and a couple of weeks' worth of time mean a lot as far as getting things done. And I don't know who may be out there who was anticipating the June 19th is all. Nobody's made me aware of that. That's just something that I've been thinking about from the standpoint of if we adopted it with a date that wasn't tonight, but was, even if it's 2 weeks away, just gives people the opportunity to do things. I know that the town needs to get going on the bathhouse. I'm familiar with, I'm trying to thread the needle as far as thoughts on that as well.
Okay, but we recognize this, and I will say this. When we called for the hearing, we went the extra mile. We didn't just do a rote call for hearing and let it go. We let it be known that we were looking seriously at what we're doing tonight.
Yes, sir.
Okay?
Yes,
So
sir.
you've had a whole month to look at it, and you've obviously looked at it, and we
I'm looking
appreciate
at it. I'm
it.
fine. I'm fine with it.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else?
No, sir.
Okay. Any other speakers? Anyone? And once we go back, it's up to us at this point. So if you've got something to say, please say it now.
I've got another question for Rob.
Okay.
Do you feel the 48-hour advance notice is appropriate minimum?
Yeah, I think so. That was what was given in the sample from CRS when I inquired about that question. It seems reasonable enough to me. If you think it should be further out, I don't have a problem with that
No.
either.
You didn't say what you're referring to. You're referring to the non...
Or an inspection?
Yeah, non-conversion.
For an inspection?
Inspection, yeah.
Right.
I would think it would give well, I guess in a typical where, the majority of the homes are owned by or resided in by the homeowners, it might be reasonable, but I guess thinking about as many out-of-state homeowners,
Yeah,
more
that's what
notice
I'm
might
thinking
be needed.
Well,
Dave,
Sir.
48 hours, not enough?
I personally don't think it is.
I don't either.
So,
Someone gets it in the mail and they've got to They live a 13-hour drive away, and
Okay, well, when we get into discussion,
we
we
can
can
talk about
change
that.
that. I mean, that's, that's an option you can do. I brought it up to ask the question because I didn't, the way it's worded right now, we're blessed with a council that's, really in tune with property rights, and we try very hard to recognize that. And we're blessed even more with a staff that's in tune with that and is sensitive to property rights and really goes above and beyond trying to get it right and be courteous and professional to whomever they're dealing with. That's not always been the case in this town, and it may not be the case in the future with a council pushing staff to do something, or even a staff that's overzealous. And I've seen that in the workplace that I've been, where somebody just took the words as they're written right now and said, I have a right to be here, bang, I'm here. And we're trying to prevent that. So if you want to increase the time limit, that's fine. But what we're trying to do is to say to a property owner, we're just not going to come here without announcement in an overzealous fashion. We don't have that now. Hope we'll never get it, but it's not always been the case, and we all know that. Okay? All right. Any more questions?
No.
All right. All right, do I hear a motion to go back into regular session?
Motion to leave public hearing, go back into regular session, Mr. Mayor.
Does it have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? There are none. All right, council, what do you want to do with this? And considering the problem that we have, talk to me. David,
Sir.
you're the builder on council, so
Well, I mean, there's a lot going on here, but I agree with Mr. Overton. I feel like there's a little bit of time should be given before we can go back and change it, that's fine. That's,
okay.
the average four corners is very concerning. It was concerning before the flood maps came out. It's even more concerning now.
How would you change that?
I don't know.
Explain how that's changed.
But I mean, I have ideas of how we can change it as far as building permits and counting height. Certainly, there's plenty of people from the home builders that can get involved and chime in on that. The problem is if you're in a hole, you're trying to get out of it.
Right.
And once you get out of that, you're affecting floor height. And then you can't exceed 35 feet. And there's other towns that have made changes to their ordinances to try to help that out a little bit. I think that's something we really need to look at.
Okay, so you're recommending basically not passing it and looking at it further?
I just want to make sure that we can come back to it.
we can always do elevation.
I will just throw in that part's gonna be in the maximum building height in the zoning ordinance. That's not gonna be addressed in the flood damage prevention ordinance. So that would, I'd be happy to look at that, but that's gonna have to go to the planning board. So it'd be April, so that'd be June before it can get back here for a change in height. 'Cause it'll be April planning board for a text amendment for the maximum building height.
I just feel like we're inadvertently encouraging to build in a hole in certain lots. So, I mean, we shouldn't be encouraging folks to try to be in a hole, not to exceed 35 feet.
Okay, anybody else?
I think we need to address it tonight, Mr. Mayor.
I think we need to address the flood ordinance tonight.
All right.
The building height and how the original grade is determined is part of zoning, not part of the flood. But we need to do something, and I'd also like to see a more definitive 48-hour inspection. I think is too short notice, considering the number of people who do not live in the homes.
Okay.
But then on the other hand, if it was a 48-hour notice, is it going to be inspected within the next 48 hours? I mean, or is it going to be 3 weeks down the road so that now we have a stretch where a homeowner might be wanting to be present for the inspection so that they can find out if everything's all right? But, I'm just, haven't thought that all the way through.
All right, now we have to be a little bit practical too.
That too.
And, I mean, there's a point where we say, there's a limit that we want to put out there to notify somebody, and that notification can come from staff with whatever caveats they need to say, you're an out-of-state property owner, we allow 48 hours, but we're going to do, a certain date, we'd like to do this. I mean, there's any number of ways that staff can handle that. All we're doing is putting out something here that says, we recognize that it could be abused if we don't give some prior notice. And whatever that notice is, leave it up to staff to take care of doing it in the proper, sensitive, proper manner. And they are professionals, they'll do that. So I don't think we can dictate every element of what they should do.
I'll add in with that to if we adopt this, the inspection that would be occurring would just be that the enclosure is still just being used as parking, storage, or dry access. So presumably somebody would know if they've converted it or not.
That would be a terrible.
True enough.
Probably wouldn't get in to inspect it anyways if it had been.
And by the way, Mr. Overton was being kind when he said, I think it was you that said that the next owner needed to know. The current owner a lot of times needs to know too, so that's a different story. All right. Jeff, you got anything to tell us?
No, I don't.
All right. And Craig?
I think we need to move on it tonight,
All right.
vote on it tonight.
Do we want to, so that would change the date to March 2, 2020. And do we want to add the engineered opening? Do we understand that? The engineered opening is like he said, is the pressure. And if you're in a river system, that pressure can be pretty enormous. It's not as much here, although I was surprised in Hurricane Irene how much pressure there was. And Dorian did a lot of pressure down in Ocracoke, so it's there. There's no question about that. But whether or not we decide on square inch or engineered, the engineer, they're paying for an engineer to tell them what to do. That seems reasonable to me.
They want to pay
That's to
for it,
me
yeah.
too.
Huh?
That seems reasonable to me too.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion? David?
Not this time.
All right. Do I hear a motion? Preferably the one that was given us.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adopt the proposed text amendments to replace the existing Chapter 14 Flood Damage Prevention Ordinance with the proposed revised Chapter 14 with changes to include the draft attendant utility definition and I'm going to add a 72-hour notice requirement for inspections. This ordinance is effective upon adoption. Additionally, I move to adopt the flood insurance study number 37055 C. Charles v. Victor 000 and associated flood insurance rate maps effective date June 19, 2020.
And wait a minute. That doesn't put this in effect until June.
Well, no, that's showing that the maps are effective June 19th, 2020, but the ordinance is effective upon adoption.
Okay. Now, did you want to add engineered openings to that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Be adding
And
that.
there's also
You amend that?
Yes. I'm in.
And there's also that shaded X, the substantial improvements don't apply to the shaded X language that Mr. Overton had emailed about, so I don't know if that was intended or not.
That's just clarity.
It's just
clarity.
clarifying.
Add, amend and add that, Lynn, please.
All right, so
Please. Thank you.
you've amended it. Does the amended motion have a second?
Second.
All right. Lynn, can you work all that in?
Yeah.
Thank you,
All
Lynn.
right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? There are none. All right, thank you. Let's see where we're at next. All right, we're at the town manager.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Just have one announcement. The town did receive a $90,000 grant to clean some of our ditches and canals as a result of Hurricane Florence. So we're working with Dare County Soil and Water with that. Several years ago, we received a grant of $210,000. So we're looking to keep some of the debris and the vegetative debris out of our canals and ditches to help with the flooding situation. Other than that, that's all I have this evening.
Okay, just for public consumption, cleaning the ditches does not include underwater debris.
Correct, it's only,
Okay, because last time people were asking that question.
yeah, no dredging.
All right. No dredging, no dragging. All right, Mr. Attorney.
Mayor, I've got nothing. Got a lot of notes, but no comments.
All right, well, keep us straight on these motions and the amendments thereof. All right, Town Council, let's start with Jeff.
I don't have anything.
Okay, David?
Spoken enough tonight, thank you.
All right. Lynn?
I'm very happy with the weather and the fact that spring is arriving and it's almost daylight.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks, staff, once again for all the hard work, and I'd like to echo what Dorothy said. She gave a fine presentation. I am on the complete count committee for the 2020 census. It is very important to be counted. You get that invitation in the mail. She's told you get 5. If you don't want somebody knocking on your front door, don't throw it away and forget about it. Fill it out, all right? Thank you very much.
All right, I don't have anything to add to tonight. Public comment. Anyone? Your last chance tonight. Let the record show no one came forward. I motion to adjourn.
Second, Mr. Mayor.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We're just never in. Thank you. Thank you.